All right. Hello. So I had a revelation over lunch. It wasn't a Cartesian revelation. It was like, how do I say it? Like, all right, so why should we be even interested in this? Why should I be teaching this course? Why should we read Descartes? Do we have a reason to read Descartes? What's the reason? What's the rationale? Yeah, but so what? Why do we have to know the foundations of thinking? I mean, I do have a little bit of methodology because it seems like every time I teach this course, I have to justify why we're even teaching the course. In speaking, so you're one of the august authorities here this morning, I realize that there's kind of examination going on now about, what would be the core curriculum at Seattle School. Based on a conversation I had just before the break. So why are we studying? Why should we be studying this other than, maybe American Theological Association actually knows something about philosophy, which it does. Yeah.
Well, I think I've been thinking about, maybe this might be Hegelian, but how our processes of thought, to me, feel very cyclical. So I think there's a lot to be learned.
You're talking process of what?
Of thought or philosophy, they seem to be cyclical.
Yeah.
I think there's much to be learned from these revolutionary thought processes and voices, because I think that culturally we tend to go in cycles and can learn how to react.
Right, but I guess the question, you're right, okay. But I guess I have a question too, is like, you brought up the foundational nature of this kind of thinking. And this is one of the points that I made, the very first day, that the kind of structure of thought, the way we process stuff, is dependent on philosophy. But why do we need to know that? Why can't we just go ahead and kind of think the way we want? We all know what our agendas are, right? Just follow our agendas. Blissfully. Yeah.
Is it the need, the demand for critical thinking? And as we move more and more away from the origins of these thought leaders, we can tend towards almost unpinning ourselves and perhaps going in directions that are really destructive. I mean, as humankind, I'm thinking that these are things that underpin us, but if we move in directions that are wholly, I don't know, I'm thinking technology or these new ways of thinking that social media create.
Right.
We are losing ourselves and our ability to be critical thinkers, and therefore could be we could go wayward, or I don't know, and now I'm losing my thought, but there's something that grounds us. So I guess it's foundational.
Kind of along the same line. I mean, I would say for two reasons. One is that in this context, most of our religious teaching in general has somehow come from the academic world, which is largely informed by philosophy, but also that it's very important that in terms of defending the faith, we need to be able to construct an argument. And
why do we have to defend the faith? Because after all, why should I have to defend the faith? It's just my faith. It's my faith. You can have your faith. Why should I have to be persuasive with you? Because after all, isn't that infringing on your space? Isn't that exerting my power over you?
well, of course it is, but it also if you don't know how to articulate where you stand, how do you know where you stand?
Does it matter?
You want to have an identity.
Hmm?
If you want to have an identity, and then other voices will be louder, and you're not going to really be able to contend with them.
Okay, well, it's an interesting question you raised about your identity. I think that, yeah, but I want to give everybody a chance to chime in here.
I think this is part of, like, understanding this is part of unpacking our cognitive, and like whether or not you're incorporating your faith into how you move through the world. This is so foundational to how we organize, how we engage politically, how our values are constructed, how we interact with other people, how we think about ourselves as people who are in a relationship with other people.
Okay, but one of the arguments that always comes up, and it's come up several times already in this course, is like, well, these ideas come from, people who lived long ago, that lived in a hierarchical society, some of them owned slaves, it was sort of a feudal aristocracy, there were, brutal class differences and so forth. I think to say that these people are all white is a little bit misleading, but that's just another term. But in some ways, to go back to the question of identity, we want to say, all right, well, their identity is not our identity. Therefore, if thought flows from identity, we don't, we know what's right and what's wrong in terms of identity, and we know that these people therefore are biased to a certain degree where we can't really take it seriously, right?
Aren't religion and philosophy doing the same thing? The power of the question, the search for truth. I mean, all of
But
these philosophies
that might be a biased venture in itself, right? I mean, what I call the search for truth is really the search for my truth, which means it's my truth that I can get at the expense of your truth.
That's
No?
two simultaneously held different truths don't have to be mutually exclusive.
Oh, right, they don't cancel each other out? Why not?
Not by definition.
Okay, what were you gonna say?
Well, I got hooked, I got pulled into this. I'm thinking, why are we studying Descartes? Because Descartes is in some ways deconstruction.
Well, no, I'm really asking about Descartes, saying, why are we studying?
Because he's
Philosophy at all.
deconstructing philosophy at all, or Descartes.
Well, Descartes, yeah, I mean,
Because I feel
he's a
like
famous
Because I
philosopher.
feel like he's deconstructing some of the presuppositions that existed to go back and say, were those presuppositions accurate at all? Because if those presuppositions were not accurate, they take us away from the truth. Even if we're close to the truth and we're not at the truth, we haven't arrived at the truth.
I don't think it's about truth at all as much as meaning. I mean, I feel like philosophy and studying both modern and classic philosophers helps us understand how other people have derived meaning and then help us decide how we want to then create that meaning for ourselves.
Okay, all right. Well, but especially when we all live kind of in the present, and we're all kind of steeped in this. There's always seems to be a resistance to digging way back into the past. That's true even when we were studying the Bible, because even in a theological seminary, which at least has a heritage of being evangelical, meaning that it's kind of biblically oriented, there's this notion that we don't really care about what this meant in the original historical sense. What we really care about is what we can do with it right now, And so maybe I'm asking you, well, can we do anything with, say, a figure like Descartes? Yeah.
You can identify the presuppositions which have led to the current state of your faith. At least that's what I do in this class. Because I know that because if I want to go back, closer to whatever the original Christianity, so go follow origin or whatever, I have to know, you have to understand the progressions that happened in thought. I mean, And looking at like Aristotle, now I see more of what Paul's doing in his letter, philosophy doesn't operate in a vacuum.
No.
And if I'm here to understand my role and my call and the world better, then it seems helpful to understand the heritage of that world better.
Okay, yeah.
Well, I appreciate Descartes because I feel like he's speaking against the large cultural messages that are creating war and that are being imposed upon him in a sense, and he's asserting his own mind. And I appreciate, I mean, it'd be foolish for me to think that there aren't really large cultural messages being imposed upon me now.
Right.
And so I think I appreciate him, and I feel like he's useful to me in that sense, in a way of encouraging me to rethink the messages that are around me.
Okay, good. And so, I mean, but the whole notion of hyperbolic doubt, in some sense, doubting away everything, it's like, be skeptical of things we take for granted, which have this kind of seeming seductive, epistemological certitude or moral certitude. Just out of curiosity, what messages did you identify right now that maybe you can bring a little bit of a Cartesian scalpel to kind of,
Well, I mean, just talk about the media, I talk about being a woman, what is beautiful in America? And it's a particular type of body, it's a particular type of look, and I think that it's false, and I think it's a lie, and I think that it takes work to really try to rethink that and to see it as false.
Okay, so you're saying that basically the Cartesian attitude, even though he's not raising the question about, the ideal image of womanhood, but still the fact that these things are so overwhelming, these messages are so overwhelming, and you say, well, you have to stand back for them because overwhelming just doesn't make them right. It's like we do have, particularly in democracy, something de Tocqueville noted in the 1840s, the kind of pack mentality, when all of a sudden something becomes evident to us or becomes part of the social messaging system, even if it seems to be avant-garde or progressive, and so we'll go with it, just because of the overwhelming nature of the message. And this whole idea that you have to stand back from things, there's nothing that is obvious or evident. And the critical perspective, that's what we're talking about. A critical philosophy has to question. When Heidegger said, question is the piety of thinking, he was on to something, that we have to learn to question, even the things that seem to be indubitable or unquestionable, even the kind of cliches that we hear constantly that seem to be critical or questioning. Because, the whole critical terms, critical approaches themselves can become uncritical.
Question our question.
Yeah. We have to question our method. We have to be critical of our own method of being critical. We have to constantly be engaged in this process of introspection and refinement. And that's what the method of hyperbolic doubt does. But the difference is that it's like, okay, we're not doing this just as an exercise. We're doing this, in some ways to get to a point to go where no one has gone before yet.
I just have a question of information. Is he then opening the door for question authority?
Well, that's what the whole project is.
So the first bullet point of question authority.
Right. Goodbye, Aristotle. It's the last point right there. Aristotle was, at this point in history, he was the philosopher. That's what Aquinas called him, and that's how he was regarded. Even though Aquinas was condemned initially as a heretic, then he became an authority and so forth. And then everybody kind of cited Aristotle just the same way that 5 years ago everybody was citing Derrida. Now everybody cites, some other particular, leading, trendy thinker and so forth. You give them a kind of canonical status, and not realizing that even the trendiness can have a canonicity that has to be pushed and so forth. So if there's a philosopher who basically says question authority, it's Descartes. Of course, we get to Kant, we see that that's carried even further. But it becomes a very subtle form of question. It becomes a question to the question. What are we doing? How do we, in a sense, the ultimate question of knowledge, which we call the question of epistemology, is how do I know that I know? Not what do I know, but how do I know that? So that when I do know it, I can say what I know. Right. But doesn't this? I mean, one of the the endless criticisms you have of philosophy is, well, it's just it's impractical. It's just building castles in the air. It's asking questions for the sake of asking questions. It doesn't really come down to real life, like how to repair your BMW.
But I mean, maybe not to that small of a scale, unless you've read Zen and the other motorcycle man. But like, I mean, I love philosophy. I hate reading it. Like, I like books about philosophy more than the actual philosophers because it's just hard to follow. But if we did take, more of a Cartesian.
Sort of like saying, I love going to the gym, but I hate exercise.
Yeah. Because you can play basketball at the gym and not have to do parking. But if we did have more of this spirit, if it was more pervasive, like, what would a different response to 9/11 have looked like? What happens if we look closely at buzzwords that we all say are good things that are really vague, like freedom and patriotism? Like, so maybe it's not about fixing your BMW, but maybe it's about something different. Like, if we were better thinkers, how many less people would be dead right now than were 14 years ago?
Yeah. Well, that's why one of the new genres which I can subscribe to, but I don't think it lives up totally to its nomenclature, is the notion of critical theory. And critical theory is a kind of buzzword for how you approach sets of systematic issues, political and social issues. But you look at the underlying kind of assumptions, the methodology which by things are being settled. So you have critical feminist theory, critical race theory, all the kind of issues of the world that have been problematized, but have been, in a sense, pursued as a problem in an uncritical fashion. And what a critical theory then therefore does is to say, all right, we're going to problematize methods that are pursued after something has been problematized. We're going to problematize the problematizer. So forth. And and if you have the critical method and the critical spirit, then you can begin to do that. But also, critical method is knowing, when to draw back your fangs. It's not about this endless kind of pursuit of criticizing. It's like, okay, what's the point? What's the goal here? So you can question everything, but if you're questioning things for the sake of not, getting some kind of answers, and so problems always require, in some sense, some idea of a strategy for solution, even if they don't give us an actual solution. So, and critical thought, critical theory, critical philosophy, which I would say from Descartes on, all philosophy is a version of what we call critical. Except the term isn't introduced until Kant, and then that's what he calls this philosophy. Yes.
So to kind of summarize a little bit, Plato and Socrates might think just the idea of questioning is a higher form of living. So regardless of if you finally get the answer, maybe, as compared to Descartes, which is like, no, we do want the answer. It's kind of maybe what I'm hearing you say a little bit is like the idea of being critical matters and being critical of how we're critical, but in the end it has to resolve. It has to be like a linear thought to it.
Right. Exactly. All right. So I ask you this. So how could we? Look, some of you kind of alluded to that, but if we were to say, okay, this is what Descartes does for me. This is the kind of problem that Descartes allows me to frame in a new way, what would be some of those problems? Think about it for a minute. You brought up about how women are viewed in society, the image of women. Okay, doesn't apply directly to that, but it's, what you're saying is to kind of take it for grantedness of what we should expect ourselves to be or to look like. Be able to say that Descartes gives you a kind of courage or empowerment, to raise those critical questions, right? So what you're saying.
Yeah, to raise critical questions and to doubt the very large and loud cultural messages that you might be receiving.
Okay. What would be some other kind of issues that you might come up with? Cartesian approach to hyperbolic doubt empower you to address. Yeah,
I think around the homeless being fed, it's kind of like there's now a way of establishing a cause and effect, like a way to measure it. So as opposed to just like working solely in abstraction.
Okay. Well, here's something. Right now, particularly in the last 6 months, because of what's happened in cities like Baltimore, where we're asking questions of race again, right? And we say, well, it's about discrimination, but then we're asking, what does that really mean? Discriminate. Obviously, you don't have Jim Crow laws. Obviously, in some ways, you have equality before the law formally, but you have attitudes, that people have. Plus, you also have social structures that are related to, economic trends and so forth. I've written about this. The so-called new urbanism, the fact that you have people more and more that want to live in central cities, and so you have this process of gentrification that's going on. Where poor neighborhoods are, poor people in poor neighborhoods are being displaced because of soaring property values. You have increasing density, which the millennial generation wants. They don't want big houses anymore. They all want to live closer together and so forth. So it means that the value of space and it's these same living patterns where people aren't having children. So you have poor families with large number of children, they're being forced out. They can't get employed. The schools are bad. We've sort of made a fetish out of the notion of choice, charter schools, which like a big innovation at one time, and now their effectiveness in doing what they're doing is really being questioned and so forth. So we have to look at something like the marginalization of African Americans in cities, not just in terms of a catch-all tyrant like discrimination, but about whole social structures, or we might say a social ecology that becomes increasingly toxic and dysfunctional, and so forth. And to realize even the critics are part of that dysfunctionality, because of, in some ways, the kind of choices of urban living, sustainable urban living, that have been made because of the critical perspective of, say, deep ecology, have an impact on the economic ecology that displaces minorities and so forth. So I mean, you have to look at all those things together, and that's what critical thinking is. You don't say, well, this is a problem because we know what causes, it becomes a mantra. Say, okay, well, when you say discrimination, what do you mean by that? You're saying, well, it's structural. Okay, structural in what way? What are the structures? Not structural. So, I mean, we can now let's raise an interesting question here. And again, I was talking to your dean at breakfast this morning, and I think one of the issues that is alive today is what the theological curriculum really be. What should it look like? What should be you studying to do what you're doing? Other than what you want to take. I'll be honest. This particular course, maybe not this course per se, but the history of philosophy is for years, going back to when I was in seminary, expected for theological accreditation. Okay, so even if we decided that you didn't like me at all and you thought it was ridiculous course, if you want to keep your AP accreditation, you have to have something like this. Because that's the same way you have to have Bible and, learn Greek or Hebrew, so if you want that particular level of certification. But let's say it wasn't a question just of certification or accreditation. Let's say it was a question of what would we be thinking about if we really wanted to, in a sense, engage culture, if we really wanted to live out the intersection of text, soul, and culture, the way a school like this, lives out. Let's not get into the question of whether the school is doing it right or so. That's what Derek was saying. He said, we're not so much concerned about whether we've got the right approach. We're concerned more about whether we're really doing it the right way, whether we're reading the right books, whether our, even our methods of delivery and so forth. So what do you think? How would critical philosophy, even the kind of Cartesian critical philosophy, what would be some of the issues it would raise about theological education? Which each of you are doing. Are you thinking enough in your education? Are you thinking too much?
Well, I think initially, as I look at the whole narrative of the philosophical conversation, even the sense that we have this divided up into two conversations, kind of broken up by the subjectivity that Descartes starts to bring in, that I feel like it's offering me a collective, an access to a collective self-reflection or a social self-reflection. And so that feels like it's a step towards a process of hopefully some form of humility in the process of doing theology. I think that's what I'm kind of hoping, that this will help train me in another way of approaching with receptivity what's possible, rather than just kind of charging forth on whatever it is that I want, which has some value to it, and it's not all that there is.
You raise a very good point, because most of us today, a lot of this has to do with the high cost of education. But even education cost a lot less, which it did when I was going to school. I don't know. I remember when my father complaining about this elite private college I went to as an undergraduate, because he had to pay $1,200 a year for tuition.
Don't even go there.
Uh,
You pay that interest every month.
Right. But that we tend to look at education as something that's going to have some kind of payoff, and everything's about the payoff. It's really a consumer attitude. It's like, this is what I want to do, or I think I want to do. Maybe I'll change my mind, but I have the right to change my mind. But as long as I know what I want to do, this is what I want to get there. And what a critical perspective can do, therefore, is to say, well, maybe you should question whether you should be studying simply what you want to study for the sake of what you think you want to do, because after all, there may be benefits to learning things you don't want to learn. When I look back at my undergraduate experience, so the courses that I considered to be the most onerous and the most irrelevant, the course I hated to take, and now look and think that these are the most valuable courses. Big example being economics. I had to take a whole year of economics. I hated economics. I hated the teacher, right? Well, I hated the teacher because I hated the course, and I hated the course because I had to be in there and so forth. And I wanted to find the meaning of life. Economics doesn't answer the question, the meaning of life. But now that in some ways my whole orientation toward solving big questions of globalization, the theory of how our world works, and it's not accidental that political theory was always embedded in something called political economy, from which we get the term economics. Now, I understand that if I hadn't learned to think economically, economy comes from the same word as ecology. It means a system of dynamic, changing, reciprocal relationships. That if I hadn't taken that course, I couldn't think like I did now, even though I absolutely hated it. There were courses that I took, which I thought were great courses, which I now realize were bad courses and so forth. So I mean, it's like the humility you're talking about. That's being willing, to be subjected to certain kinds of intellectual disciplines. And one of the things we give a lot of lip service to in higher education now, but we really don't in practice carry it out, is being interdisciplinary. Every school wants to be interdisciplinary. This school wants to be interdisciplinary. The fact of the matter is, we want to segment because we want to learn what we want to learn. And we want to learn not only what we want to learn, we want to learn in the way that we want to learn. We don't want to be anybody telling us because, well, it's like the student I had in my class years ago. It was in a required course. It was called a core course, and it was actually humanities for business students. And this guy was just sitting up in the back of the room, just reading the newspaper with the newspaper. That was before people actually did read newspapers. And I finally went up to him and said, "Why?" He said, "It's really impolite, not only professor or students, for you to do this." And he put the newspaper down and said, "I paid for this course. I paid for this university. I pay your salary, and I'll do whatever I want." The newspaper, he was serious. So I mean, that's kind of an extreme. It's a kind of extreme case, but that's how a lot of us kind of practically think, right?
So is that what you're saying about interdisciplinary? That's like sort of the.
Right.
I have a very good approach to that, but like I would disagree with that, and I think on the grounds of maybe exactly why you're frustrated with it.
The interdisciplinarity?
Yeah.
No, I'm not frustrated.
Yeah.
I'm frustrated with the fact that we don't do it. for that
Oh,
reason.
okay. Yeah, because to me, that feels like that's, when you subject yourself to an interdisciplinary work, it requires that you not be a master and that you live with uncertainty in the midst of what you yet do not understand. And it's that traveling back and forth between what you don't understand and slowly gaining ground that we actually get to take in, I think, and begin to embody learning.
Right.
So I just want to make sure that I was understanding that correctly.
Yeah, right. I got kind of off on a tangent there. All right. So, let me ask you this. So, do you think what you're beginning now to, and I know you've been in this course before, so this is your second go around.
Not this one.
Huh?
Not this one.
This is your first course in this? That's not good.
I took philosophy 2.
Yeah,
There's
but-
lots of people who did.
yeah, but not everybody. That's what I'm saying. So, the more philosophy you had, could you see this as in some ways being interdisciplinary, informing other kind of disciplinary enterprises? How's that?
Well, the process of questioning, the process of learning,
Yeah,
feels like that's what philosophy is offering me. Is
but is it,
beginning
you
to
can, they're different, you can question without doing philosophical questions, right?
No, yeah, but like in this way, the medium is the method, or the message. That by, I'm learning by doing it. So as I learn the way philosophy has done it, I'm learning to do questions. I'm learning how to question. And I'm borrowing on the shoulders of giants who have come before, who have braved to ask these questions in big contexts where a lot was on the line. So I get to kind of follow behind them and pay attention.
Okay, well, let's take another field. What's another kind of disciplinary area that everybody here takes?
Psychology.
Psychology. So, how do you bring the method of critical questioning that comes out of philosophy into the psychology course? Maybe what's the barrier to that? Or in that approach?
Well, I mean, yeah, I'm not a psychology student either, but I mean, when you want to understand why people do the things they do, I mean, actually, psychology and economics would go hand in hand. I mean, how do you react to markets? How do you react to trauma? How do you react? I mean, and I know we're trying to blend psychology and religion, so the answer to all that is sin and evil, but I mean, in a real way, like, everything's connected, because the planet is an ecosystem, like, or at least it's a system, maybe ecosystem's not the right word, but it's, you know.
It's interconnected.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I guess I'd say to me, it's fairly obvious.
Okay, but, you know, not everything is interconnected in the same way. You know, and that can become
You
a
have to
shade
be able
to
to
say, well, it's all interconnected. So we all, no, we have to study everything. We have to, everything's interrelated, but, okay, but we have to say, okay, in what ways are they interrelated? Some interrelations matter more than other interrelations, you know? Like, we know that, you know, if you start pouring tons of chemicals into the stream, you know, downstream, that's going to affect people, you know? If, you know, you sneeze, somebody hears that, and maybe it will disturb their reverie, but it's not going to have the same kind of impact, you know? Or, you know, I mean, you can have a chain reaction on the Los Angeles freeway, but that's different than, say, a chain reaction, you know, in a fog on a major highway in the country where people are going 80 miles an hour, and then you get these massive, smash-ups and so forth that you read about from time to time. So, I mean, critical thinking allows you to assess, you know, the relative importance of things as well. It's like we can say, well, we have to legislate, you know, every good that we can think of because the planet's all interconnected. We know that if we legislate the good for one constituency, that may turn out to be bad for another constituency, right? So we have to understand how those relationships works in terms of,
And then theoretically, we take a guess at which is the greater good.
right, yeah. Right, so, I mean, it's, look at something like student loan debt, which, you know, everybody of your generation is concerned about. Have you ever wondered why you have so much student loan debt and why, you know, the cost of education has increased far much more than the cost of living, or far even more than other kind of inflationary tendencies in society, like medical costs? Anybody ever examine that?
Because the demand's gone away.
Well, yeah, but it's not just the demand. We expect a
No, I
lot
mean,
more.
There's a reason, yeah, because now most good jobs require an education. Probably a master's, because so many people have a bachelor's. And so, because in American society, we live in a place where individuals always need to separate themselves and look like the best.
Well, but
Maybe not so much with theological education, because there's no jobs in that anyway, but we still come.
yeah,
But
you
I
can
mean,
love
truly,
it. You
like,
don't think about, you know, having paid for it.
we were so successful saying that America is going to be produce the best and the brightest, that now there's that status thing, like the idea of marketing and macro, like the demand goes up, not necessarily based on an economic way, that's not what I mean, but like the societal value has shifted. And as we move away from a production society, there's going to be less jobs, you know, putting rivets on wings at Boeing as they send their manufacturing all over.
Right, yeah, so we live in a knowledge society, and it's that you don't really have a choice of opting out of the educational system. You have what is effectively a kind of monopoly system, and that's where prices go up. That's true.
And we don't like to cut the military budget, so we cut the education.
Right, but
I mean, there's all sorts.
if we cut the military budget, I don't think that would necessarily bring down the price of higher education.
No,
But here's the thing, it's like in America, you go to Europe, okay, you haven't had inflation to say, yeah, well, a lot of education is subsidized. But, even subsidized education, i.e. public education, has been soaring in price here. We're in a country like the Netherlands, where I visit a lot because my son and daughter-in-law and grandchildren live, or Austria, where, I've got a sort of part-time gig that I do all the time, sort of church community over there and that sort of thing. It's like the cost of education remains really low. The difference is we expect a lot more out of education than they expect over there. They expect, for example, we expect that we pour money into making sure everybody gets to learn. People who have a hard time learning, we're going to invest in, giving them tutors and counselors and, people in counsel for trauma and so forth. And also we want, administrators to make sure that certain, legislative mandates are being carried out and so forth. Basically in Europe, education is a dog-eat-dog system. It's like, okay, well, it's cheap. It's like shopping shopping at Aldi's. I don't know if you've ever shopped at Aldi's, but you don't. It's all cash, and you have to find things, and sometimes things aren't even labeled right, and you don't even know what you're getting half the time. But it's cheap, and in some ways, when I was going to school, I lived in this dorm that had holes in the wall. And I remember waking up in the middle of the night. This was at a private college, where this was one my father was paying more about. And a piece of the plaster fell off because the dorm room was in a building that was built in the 1880s. And, essentially it hadn't been renovated since the 1880s. Well, now nobody would go to college like that anymore, right? Like, you gotta have a nice room. You gotta have a jacuzzi. So, we want more out of education. But that's, to be able to think about a social problem, that requires a level of critical analysis that most of us aren't willing to undertake. It's like, the question is, okay, what do we really want? Okay, we really want this, right? If we want this, are we willing to pay for it? Well, no, we're not willing to pay for it. But we want it. And say, okay, so what does that tell us about our values? That's a kind of consumer mentality. And not to say we shouldn't have the social good and we shouldn't have to pay for the social good. But that means that we have to subtract from somewhere else. You can't have it all. Even though I realize that there's an inherent attitude that it's a very American thing. It's like, if we're American, we should have it. So, all right, okay. So, we could have a kind of endless discussion about social issues and so forth. I didn't really want to open that up, but I just wanted to find out, because what are some of the, let me ask you this then. Okay. So what are some of the questions that philosophy can't, what philosophy cannot really deal with, or can't really help us out? What are the limits of philosophy?
My first stab, which may not be accurate, would be like happiness.
Okay, why not? When Aristotle wrote the Ethics, he said that was basically going about figuring out how to make you happy.
It did.
Metaphysics is about how you.
First stab.
By the way, I do agree with you. I don't think
Arrival at a knowledge does not necessarily equate with the emotive quality. I might land with the truth and not be happy with it. I might land.
truth sometimes
I
can
might
be very
land.
unsettling.
I might land at ambivalence and be in bliss. So they don't necessarily.
Well, the truth can make you free, but it also make you a nervous wreck. Yeah.
Well, at the beginning of this book on Descartes, he writes about how there's really no danger in him thinking these things. He's really just thinking them, and he's not doing anything. It's not required of him. So I think that's a limitation of philosophy, is that there's not much being done or required of you in an embodied way.
Okay. All right. So,
Think
I mean,
about
there is 20th century philosophy that tries to, in a sense, embody our thinking. You know, like a philosopher like Maurice Merleau-Ponty. You know, in a sense, his whole approach has been how can we, in a sense, corporealize philosophy? How can we think our bodies along with our minds? You know, it's a whole set of separate issues. But genuinely, you're right. Philosophy has tended to ignore the body, especially because of critiques in there. So the question is, you know, can we really think our bodies, or maybe this is a limitation of classical philosophy? Classical philosophy wasn't really so much interested in the problem. It was interested in the mind. The other limitations of philosophy.
Well, I mean, it's probably not gonna help us cure cancer or anything like that. I mean, there's a lot of day-to-day things that philosophy just doesn't apply to.
You spend all your time with philosophy, you won't know if you have cancer. But, you know, should philosophy be practical? You know?
Well, it is in field
Studying-
like medical ethics.
Huh? Well, it's like this, okay, we said, well, studying math will cure cancer. Sure, not directly. But studying philosophy may cure cancer because it may teach you to think about the paradigms of science in which you're involved in your quest to, you know, come up with a cure for cancer. Or it may not be able to cure cancer because there may not ultimately be a cure for cancer. There may be ways of mitigating some cancers, maybe cures for some cancers. We already have some. You know, but a cure for cancer in general, maybe philosophy won't be able to do that, and that's a good thing. Okay. All right. Anything else you can think of? All right. I think what we're going to do now is take one more